What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about fate, redemption, and the extraordinary power of a voice to bridge the gap between despair and hope. This isn't just another tale from the American frontier. This is a story that will haunt you, heal you, and remind you that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the darkest moments of human suffering. Picture this: a dusty mining town in Colorado Territory, 1871, where human dignity was as scarce as water in August, and women were bought and sold like livestock. The crowd gathered around a makeshift auction stage, rough men with hollow souls and hungry hearts, waiting to bid on the day's final merchandise. A woman with a burlap sack tied over her head, her identity hidden, her worth reduced to whatever desperate man was willing to pay. But what happened when she spoke, just two words, a whispered name, will stop your heart cold. Because in that moment, one man in the crowd recognized something that would shatter his world and rebuild it in ways he never imagined possible. A voice he'd heard before, in the darkest hour of his life, when death seemed certain and hope was nothing but a memory. How does a $2 bid at a human auction become the beginning of the most extraordinary love story the frontier ever witnessed? How does a woman stripped of everything, her freedom, her dignity, even her face, find the strength to reclaim not just her identity, but her very soul? Stay with me, because this story of Marcus Kane and the woman behind the sack will tear your heart apart and rebuild it stronger than before. You'll witness the moment when recognition met desperation, when a voice from the past called out to a future neither of them dared to dream possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we reach that life-changing moment of recognition, before we understand why that voice echoed through Marcus Kane's memory like a prayer answered, let me take you back to a suffocating afternoon in Timber Falls, Colorado, where the line between salvation and damnation was measured in silver coins and the courage to see worth where others saw only shame. This is their story. This is how love found two people who'd been told they were beyond saving. This is how the frontier taught an entire town that sometimes the most precious things come disguised as the most broken. Are you ready to witness a transformation that will challenge everything you believe about second chances? Because once we step into that auction house, there's no turning back. The afternoon sun beat down on Timber Falls like the judgment of an angry god, turning the main street into a furnace of dust and desperation. The air hung thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, tobacco juice, and the metallic tang of silver coins changing hands. At the far end of the street, where the respectable businesses gave way to saloons and gambling houses, a crowd of men had gathered around a makeshift platform built from wagon planks and whiskey crates. Marcus Kane stood at the edge of the gathering, his hat pulled low against the glare, watching the spectacle with the detached interest of a man who'd seen too much of humanity's capacity for cruelty. At 34, he was a successful cattle buyer, a man who dealt in livestock and understood the value of good breeding stock. But this wasn't a cattle auction, and what was being sold on that ramshackle stage wasn't livestock, not officially anyway. The auctioneer, a thin man with a deputy's badge pinned to his faded vest and the moral flexibility that came with years of looking the other way, slammed his wooden gavel against a fence post. His voice carried across the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd sold everything from stolen horses to human dignity. "All right, gentlemen, last item of the day," he bellowed, his words slicing through the murmur of anticipation. "Got ourselves a real mystery here. She ain't shown her face, ain't given her full name, been wearing that sack since Missouri. Says she can work, says she'll obey. Starting bid, $2. Who's brave enough to marry the unknown?" Laughter rippled through the crowd like wildfire, cruel and sharp-edged. "Maybe she's a witch under that thing," someone shouted from the back. "Or a corpse," came another voice, followed by more laughter. "Might as well marry the damn sack." On the platform stood a figure that barely seemed human anymore. She was small, perhaps 5.5 feet tall, wearing a dress that had once been blue but was now the color of prairie dust. Her hands were bound in front with rough hemp rope, and over her head was tied a burlap sack, stained and shapeless, that completely obscured her features. Only the rise and fall of her chest betrayed that there was a living person beneath the crude covering. Marcus found himself studying her posture, the way she held herself despite the degradation. There was something about her stillness that wasn't submission, it was endurance. The kind of strength that came from surviving things that should have broken her completely. She ain't much good if she won't even speak, the auctioneer continued, clearly growing impatient with the lack of bidding enthusiasm. Course, some men prefer their women quiet. More laughter, coarser this time. A few men spat into the dust and turned away, already losing interest. Others lingered, drawn by morbid curiosity and the promise of a bargain. $2 was less than most men spent on whiskey in a single evening. Marcus had seen enough human auctions to know how they worked. The woman on the platform wasn't being sold into slavery. That was illegal now, at least on paper. Instead, she was being sold into domestic service contracts or marital arrangements. Legal words that meant the same thing. Someone with money was buying someone without choices. He should have walked away. He had business to attend to, cattle to evaluate, deals to negotiate. The smart thing would be to mount his horse and ride back to his ranch, leaving this sordid scene behind him. But something kept him rooted to the spot, watching the woman who stood so perfectly still under her burlap shroud. "Come on now," the auctioneer cajoled, his voice taking on the desperate edge of a man who needed to close a deal. $2 for a woman who'll work hard and ask no questions. Hell, you don't even need to look at her if you don't want to. Just put her in the kitchen and forget she's there. The silence stretched longer this time. Even the crude jokes had died away, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something that crossed lines most men preferred not to think about. A few more spectators drifted away, suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. That's when Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not pity exactly, but recognition. He'd been alone for most of his adult life, not from lack of opportunity, but from choice. He'd built a successful ranch through hard work and careful planning, accumulated enough wealth to live comfortably, even luxuriously by frontier standards. But success had brought its own kind of isolation, and lately the silence of his empty house had begun to feel less like peace and more like punishment. More than that, there was something about the woman's stillness that reminded him of another time, another place, when he'd been the one in desperate need of help from a stranger. $2, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. Every head turned toward him as if pulled by invisible strings. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise and obvious relief. Well, well, we have a bidder. $2 from the gentleman in the black hat. Do I hear 3? The crowd murmured and shifted, but no other bids came. Marcus wasn't surprised. The kind of men who frequented human auctions were generally looking for obvious beauty or youth, something they could display as well as use. A woman whose face was hidden held no appeal for men motivated by vanity as much as lust. $2 once, $2 twice. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Sold to Mr. Kane, Marcus replied, stepping forward through the parting crowd. Marcus Kane. Excellent. Mr. Marcus Kane, successful rancher from the valley. The auctioneer's voice had taken on the obsequious tone he used for customers with actual money. Let it be known that Mr. Kane has entered into lawful marriage contract under the eyes of the law and the witness of this assembly. He shoved a piece of paper toward Marcus, who signed it without hesitation. The document was crude, barely legal, but it would serve its purpose. The woman on the platform was now his responsibility under territorial law. The auctioneer turned to the figure in the sack. You're now legally bound, miss. State your name for the record. For a long moment, there was only silence. The burlap sack moved slightly as she breathed, but no sound emerged. Marcus found himself holding his breath, waiting. Then so softly that everyone had to lean forward to hear, a voice emerged from beneath the cloth. It was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse or fear, but the words were clear. Elena Santos. Marcus froze. The name hit him like a physical blow, but it wasn't the name that stopped his heart. It was the voice, soft, musical despite its current weakness, with the faintest trace of an accent that spoke of Spanish heritage and careful education. It was a voice he'd heard before, in circumstances so different from this degrading spectacle that for a moment he couldn't reconcile the two. 2 years ago, a blizzard in the high country. Death creeping closer with each labored breath. And a voice, this voice, speaking words of comfort and hope when he'd given up on both. You do not need to know who I am, but I am not going to let you die. The memory crashed over him with stunning clarity. A hidden cave, a fire that meant the difference between life and death, gentle hands tending his wounds, and a woman who'd saved his life while keeping her own identity carefully hidden. Marcus stepped closer to the platform, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Elena Santos, he repeated quietly, testing the name, confirming what his heart already knew. The sack-covered head turned slightly toward him, and though he couldn't see her face, he could feel her attention focusing on him with startling intensity. That's settled then, the auctioneer announced, clearly eager to conclude the day's business. Mrs. Kane, you'll go with your husband now. The contract's binding, and you're his responsibility from here on. Marcus ignored the official pronouncement, his attention focused entirely on the woman before him. He reached out slowly, carefully, and took her bound hands in his. Even through the rough rope, he could feel the calluses on her palms, the evidence of hard work and harder living. Elena, he said softly, so quietly that only she could hear. It's you, isn't it? From the cave. 2 winters ago. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her entire body went rigid, her breathing stopped for a heartbeat, and then she was trembling, not with fear, but with something that might have been recognition, relief, or pure shock. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet it was barely audible. Marcus. The single word confirmed everything. This was the woman who'd appeared like an angel in his darkest hour, who'd nursed him back to health and then vanished like smoke, leaving him wondering if she'd been real or just a fever dream. Now here she was, reduced to being sold like livestock, and he was the one with the power to change her circumstances. Yes, he said simply, and you're safe now. The crowd was growing restless, eager to disperse now that the entertainment was over. Marcus gently took Elena's arm, not possessively, but protectively, and began to guide her away from the platform. Wait, called the auctioneer. She's got belongings, such as they are. He gestured to a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth that sat beside the platform. Marcus picked it up, surprised by how light it was. Everything this woman owned in the world apparently fit into a package smaller than a saddlebag. As they walked away from the auction site, Marcus could feel Elena's tension in every step. She moved carefully as if expecting the rope around her hands or the sack over her head to catch on something, as if freedom were still too fragile to trust. They reached his horse, a steady gelding named Thunder, who stood patiently despite the afternoon heat. Marcus secured Elena's bundle to his saddle, then turned to face her. I'm going to cut those ropes, he said quietly. And I want you to know, you don't have to keep that sack on unless you want to. She stood perfectly still as he drew his knife and carefully severed the hemp rope around her wrists. When her hands were free, she rubbed her wrist where the rough fibers had chafed, but she made no move to remove the burlap covering. Where? She started, then stopped, her voice catching. Where are you taking me? Home, Marcus said simply. To my ranch. It's about an hour's ride from here. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement of the sack. And then, Marcus mounted Thunder and offered her his hand to help her up behind him. As she settled against his back, he felt the tremor that ran through her. Exhaustion, fear, and something that might have been hope. Then we figure it out, he said, spurring the horse into a gentle walk. Together. As they rode away from Timber Falls, leaving the dust and degradation behind them, Marcus found himself remembering that night in the cave when this woman had saved his life without asking for anything in return. She'd given him warmth when he was freezing, water when he was dying of thirst, hope when despair had nearly claimed him. Now it was his turn to save her. The only question was whether she'd let him. Behind them, the auction site gradually disappeared into the heat shimmer, but Marcus could feel Elena's grip on his shirt, steady and sure. For the first time in 2 years, the woman who'd haunted his dreams was real and solid and safe in his care. The ride home had never felt so much like a beginning. The Kane Ranch spread out before them like a promise of peace, nestled in a valley where the Colorado mountains rose like protective sentinels against the sky. Cottonwood trees lined the creek that ran through the property, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind, and the late afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Marcus felt Elena's grip tighten on his shirt as they approached the main house, a solid structure built from local timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides and windows that caught the light like welcoming eyes. It wasn't grand by city standards, but it was well built, comfortable, and completely isolated from the prying eyes of town. "This is your home?" Elena asked softly, her voice still muffled by the burlap sack. "Our home," Marcus corrected gently, "for as long as you want it to be." He brought Thunder to a stop near the front porch and dismounted, then helped Elena down with careful hands. She stood uncertainly beside the horse, her head turning slightly as if trying to take in her surroundings despite the cloth barrier. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, "you don't have to keep wearing that. Not here. There's no one to see you but me, and no one to judge you but yourself." Her hands went to the knot at the base of her neck, then stopped. It's been my protection for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be seen." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she might expect. "Then keep it as long as you need to. But I want you to know, when you're ready to take it off, you'll be safe here." He gathered her belongings and gestured toward the house. "Come on, let me show you around." The interior of the ranch house was spacious and well-appointed, furnished with handmade pieces that spoke of both comfort and permanence. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace, shelves lined with books, and furniture arranged to encourage conversation rather than formal entertaining. Everything was clean and orderly, but there was a quality to the stillness that suggested a house that had been quiet for too long. "The kitchen's through here," Marcus said, leading Elena into a room that was clearly the heart of the home. A large wooden table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that had been worn smooth by years of use. Copper pots hung from hooks, and windows looked out over a vegetable garden that showed signs of careful tending. Elena moved carefully through the space, her covered head turning as she oriented herself to the layout. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it. Had some help with the heavy timber work, but the finished carpentry's mine." Marcus set her bundle on the table and watched as she traced her fingers along the smooth surface. "Are you hungry?" "I was about to start dinner when I saw the auction." She nodded, then seemed to remember that gestures might not be visible through the sack. "Yes, I haven't eaten since yesterday." Marcus felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the circumstances that had reduced her to this state. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. "Let me cook for you for a change." As he moved around the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Marcus found himself glancing frequently at the figure sitting so still and straight at his table. The burlap sack concealed her features completely, but he could see the way her hands rested carefully in her lap, the careful control in her posture that spoke of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. "Elena," he said as he stirred the stew, "I need you to know something. That contract I signed today, it doesn't mean what those men think it means. You're not my property. You're not obligated to do anything you don't want to do." Her head turned toward him. "Then why did you buy me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I recognized your voice, and because I owed you a debt I never got the chance to repay." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one in front of her, along with a spoon and a piece of warm bread. Then he sat across from her and waited. Elena picked up the spoon and carefully lifted a corner of the sack, just enough to bring the utensil to her mouth. She ate slowly, precisely, like someone who'd learned not to waste food or call attention to herself while eating. "You said you recognized my voice," she said between careful bites. "From where?" Marcus had been dreading this question, knowing that the answer would expose vulnerabilities he'd spent 2 years trying to forget. But she deserved the truth, and he owed her that much at least. 2 years ago, he began, staring into his own bowl, "I was up in the high country, buying cattle from a rancher near Pikes Peak. Got caught in a blizzard on the way home. Worst storm I'd ever seen. My horse went lame, threw me when he stepped in a hole. I hit my head on a rock, and by the time I came to, I was lost, injured, and the temperature was dropping fast." Elena had stopped eating, her attention focused completely on his words. I wandered for hours trying to find shelter, but everything looked the same in the snow. I was getting weaker, starting to stumble, and I knew I was dying. The cold was creeping in, making me sleepy, making me want to just lie down and give up. Marcus paused, remembering the bone-deep despair of that moment, the absolute certainty that he was going to die alone in the wilderness. Then I saw a light, just a flicker, barely visible through the snow, but it was enough. I followed it to what looked like a solid rock face, but there was a gap, hidden behind some fallen boulders. A cave. Elena's breathing had grown shallow, and her hands had stilled completely on the table. Inside was a woman, Marcus continued, his voice growing softer. She had a fire going, some kind of shelter set up in the back of the cave. She was wearing a covering over her head, just like the one you have on now. I never saw her face, but I heard her voice. He looked up at Elena, though he couldn't see her expression. She saved my life, fed me, tended my wounds, kept me warm through the worst of the storm. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone. No trace that she'd ever been there except for the fire still burning, and he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small square of fabric, faded but carefully preserved. She left this behind. It was a handkerchief, delicate despite its age, embroidered with tiny flowers and purple thread. Elena's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the burlap. I searched for her, Marcus said. Spent weeks asking around, trying to find out who she was, where she'd gone. No one had seen her. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. He set the handkerchief on the table between them. But I never forgot her voice, the way she spoke, the words she used, the accent underneath the English. When you said your name today, I knew. Elena's hands were trembling now, so slightly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs of distress, and he could see that she was struggling with some powerful emotion. The handkerchief, she whispered. You kept it. It was all I had of her, of you. Marcus reached across the table, not to touch her, but to place his hand near hers. Elena, why were you out there alone in a blizzard? And why? He gestured gently toward the sack covering her head. Why this? For a long moment, she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. I was running. Had been for months. The covering, it wasn't my choice, not originally, but it became my protection, my way of moving through the world without being recognized. Running from what? Elena stood abruptly, moving away from the table toward the window that looked out over the valley. From accusations, from people who wanted to see me hang for something I didn't do. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Marcus felt his stomach clench with dread, but he kept his voice steady. What kind of accusations? Murder, Elena said simply. They said I killed a man, said I planned it, executed it in cold blood for money. Marcus absorbed this information without flinching. He'd lived on the frontier long enough to know that accusations and truth didn't always align, especially when it came to women who found themselves in desperate circumstances. Did you? He asked quietly. Elena turned from the window, and though he couldn't see her face, he could feel the weight of her gaze. Would it matter if I said no? Only if you were lying. She was silent for a heartbeat. Then, no, I didn't murder anyone, but I did kill a man, and I'm not sorry he's dead. The distinction was important, Marcus realized. Murder implied premeditation, malice, intent to kill for personal gain. Killing could be many things: self-defense, protection of others, the unfortunate result of circumstances beyond one's control. Tell me what happened, he said. Elena returned to the table, moving slowly, as if the weight of memory was making each step difficult. She sat across from him again, her hands folded carefully in her lap. I was working at a boarding house in Denver, she began. The owner, Mr. Garrett, he thought that because I was Mexican, because I was alone, because I had nowhere else to go, that I would be grateful for any attention he showed me. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, understanding immediately where this story was headed. I told him no, many times. I made it clear that I was there to work, nothing more. But he wouldn't listen. He said I was being ungrateful, that I should remember my place. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if telling the story was helping her reclaim ownership of it. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen after the other boarders had gone to bed. He'd been drinking, and he was angry about something. A business deal that had gone wrong, I think. He said it was time I showed proper appreciation for his generosity. Elena paused, her breathing shallow. I fought him. I'm not a large woman, but I'm stronger than I look, and I was desperate. We struggled, and he hit me hard enough to knock me down. When I got up, I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a cast iron skillet, and I hit him with it. Self-defense, Marcus said immediately. That's what I thought. But when I hit him, he stumbled backward and fell. His head struck the corner of the stove, and she swallowed hard. He died, right there on the kitchen floor. Marcus could picture the scene. A young woman, alone and terrified, standing over the body of a man who'd tried to assault her, knowing that her word would count for nothing against his reputation. I panicked, Elena continued. I knew no one would believe me. A Mexican woman's word against a respected businessman? In Denver? I might as well have signed my own death warrant. So you ran. I ran, took only what I could carry and disappeared into the night. But Garrett had friends, connections. Word spread that I was wanted for murder. A reward was posted. And the law decided I was guilty before they even heard my side of the story. Elena's voice grew bitter. They caught me 3 months later in a town outside Colorado Springs. I tried to tell them what really happened, but they weren't interested in hearing about self-defense or assault. They saw a dead white man and a Mexican woman with blood on her clothes. How did you end up at the auction? The sheriff in that town, he had debts. Gambling debts. When the bounty hunters brought me in, he saw an opportunity. Instead of taking me back to Denver for trial, he sold me to men who traffic in human merchandise. They put the sack over my head to hide my identity, said it was for my own protection, but really it was to hide the fact that they were selling a woman wanted for murder. Marcus felt sick. The casual cruelty, the complete disregard for justice or human dignity. It was everything he hated about the lawless elements that still plagued the frontier. How long, he asked, how long have you been living like this? 2 years, since that night in Denver. The cave where you found me, I was hiding there, trying to wait out a manhunt. When I saw you, injured and dying, I couldn't just leave you, but I knew I couldn't stay either, couldn't risk being found. Marcus reached across the table and covered her hands with his own. Through the fabric of her worn dress, he could feel how thin she'd become, how the constant stress and poor nutrition had taken their toll. Elena, he said quietly, you saved my life that night. You could have stayed hidden, could have let me die rather than risk exposure. But you didn't. You chose compassion over safety. And look where it got me, she said with bitter humor. Sold at auction like livestock. It got you here, Marcus corrected, to someone who knows your true character, to someone who owes you everything. Elena was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words. When she spoke again, her voice was different, still cautious but with a note of something that might have been hope. What happens now, Marcus? I'm still wanted for murder. There are still men looking for me who think I'm worth more dead than alive. Marcus squeezed her hands gently. Now we figure out how to clear your name, and until we do, you're under my protection. No one's going to hurt you again. As the evening light faded and the first stars appeared over the valley, Marcus and Elena sat together in the kitchen of his ranch house, connected by a debt of gratitude that had become something deeper. The woman who'd saved his life was now depending on him to save hers, and Marcus was determined not to let her down. Outside, the night sounds of the Colorado wilderness began their ancient chorus. But inside the house, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds were beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something together that was stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. The morning sun crept through the kitchen windows like a cautious visitor, casting gentle light across the table where Elena sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The burlap sack still covered her head, but her posture had changed overnight, less defensive, more settled, as if some part of her had begun to accept that she might actually be safe here. Marcus had been awake since before dawn, tending to the horses and checking the boundaries of his property. It was routine work, but this morning it had felt different, charged with new purpose. He was no longer just maintaining his ranch. He was protecting a sanctuary for someone who desperately needed one. When he returned to the house, he found Elena exactly where he'd left her, staring out the window at the valley beyond. She turned when he entered, and though he couldn't see her expression, he could sense her attention focusing on him with the same intensity he'd felt at the auction. "Did you sleep?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "A little, more than I have in months." Her voice was clearer this morning, stronger. "The silence here, it's different than being alone. It feels safe." Marcus poured himself coffee and studied her carefully. "Elena, I've been thinking about what you told me last night, about the charges against you, about what really happened in Denver." She went very still. And I think we need to find a way to tell your side of the story, to people who'll listen." Elena's laugh was bitter. "You think anyone will believe a Mexican woman over a dead white businessman? You think the law cares about the truth when it's inconvenient?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that not all lawmen are corrupt. And I think that 2 years is a long time for people's memories to fade, for new evidence to surface, for the right person to ask the right questions." "What are you suggesting?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice growing more confident as his plan took shape. "I'm suggesting we go to the territorial marshal. Present your case directly, with evidence, with witnesses if we can find them. Make them listen to the truth instead of just the accusations." Elena's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Marcus, you don't understand. I'm not just wanted for questioning. There's a bounty on my head. Dead or alive? The men who trafficked me, they made sure everyone knows what I supposedly did. If we walk into a marshal's office, we might both walk out in chains." "Then we don't walk in unprepared," Marcus replied. "We gather evidence first. We find people who knew what kind of man Garrett really was. We build a case that's so strong, they can't ignore it." For a long moment, Elena was silent. When she spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "Why would you do this? Risk your reputation, your freedom, for someone you barely know?" "Because I do know you," Marcus said firmly. "Maybe not your full story, maybe not all the details of your life, but I know your character. I know that you saved a stranger's life when you could have saved yourself. I know that you've survived 2 years of hell without losing your humanity. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Elena stood abruptly and moved to the window, her back to him. "You might feel differently if you saw me." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that the sack isn't just about hiding my identity anymore. It's about hiding what they did to me." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Elena, when I fought Garrett, when I hit him with that skillet, he marked me first, cut me, said he wanted to make sure I'd remember my place even if I lived through the night." Her hands went to the knot at the base of her neck, trembling slightly. "And then, during the 2 years since, other men, some of them thought a scarred woman was easier to handle, thought I'd be grateful for any attention, even the cruel kind." Marcus stood slowly, his heart breaking for what she'd endured. "Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was stronger now, determined. "Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to clear my name, you need to know what you're fighting for. You need to see who I really am, not who you remember from that cave." She turned to face him, her hands moving to the knot behind her neck. "You need to see why they put that sack on my head in the first place." "Elena, stop. You don't need to prove anything to me." But she was already loosening the rope, her movements quick and decisive, as if she was afraid that hesitation would steal her courage. The burlap sack slipped away from her head and fell to the floor with a soft whisper. Marcus drew in a sharp breath, not from horror, but from recognition. The woman standing before him was beautiful, not despite her scars, but including them. Her hair was dark and lustrous, though shorter than it had probably once been. Her skin was olive-toned, her features delicate but strong. Her eyes were the deep brown of rich earth, intelligent and wary but not defeated. And yes, there were scars. A thin line ran from her left temple to her jaw, obviously made by a blade. Another marked her throat just above her collarbone. They were visible, permanent, impossible to ignore. But they were also part of her story, part of the strength that had carried her through unimaginable trials. They didn't make her less beautiful. They made her more real. "Now you see," Elena said quietly, lifting her chin with defiant pride. "Now you understand why they covered my face, why they thought no one would want me unless they couldn't see what I'd become?" Marcus crossed the room slowly, stopping just close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Elena, you're beautiful." She flinched as if he'd struck her. "You don't have to lie to spare my feelings." "I'm not lying." His voice was steady, certain. "You're beautiful. The scars don't change that. They just tell the story of what you've survived." Elena searched his face for signs of pity or false kindness, but found only honest appreciation. "Most men see these marks and think I'm damaged goods, broken, used up." "Then most men are fools," Marcus said simply. "I see a woman who fought back when she was attacked. I see someone who refused to give up even when the whole world turned against her. I see the person who saved my life and asked for nothing in return." Tears began to trace down Elena's cheeks, the first she'd allowed herself to shed in his presence. "Marcus, you don't understand. There are bounty hunters still looking for me, men who think I'm worth more as a trophy than as a person. If you help me, if you're seen with me, you'll become a target too." "Let them come," Marcus said quietly. "This is my land, and you're under my protection now." Elena shook her head, fear flickering in her eyes. "You don't know what kind of men they are, what they're capable of." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drifted through the morning air. Both of them froze, listening as multiple horses made their way up the valley road toward the ranch house. Marcus moved to the window and peered out, his expression darkening. "3 riders. They're not from around here." Elena's face went pale. "They found me. Dear God, they actually found me. Elena, listen to me." Marcus turned from the window, his voice calm but urgent. "Go upstairs to the bedroom at the end of the hall. There's a rifle on the wall and ammunition in the dresser. If things go badly, if you hear gunshots, take the back stairs down to the kitchen and slip out through the cellar door. Follow the creek east for about a mile until you reach the old mining road. Then head south toward Canyon Creek. I won't leave you to face them alone." "You will if I tell you to," Marcus said firmly. "I didn't save you from one kind of slavery, just to watch you walk into another." The hoofbeats were closer now, and through the window they could see the riders clearly. 3 hard-looking men with the kind of faces that belonged on wanted posters. The leader was tall and lean, with the predatory stillness of a professional hunter. His companions flanked him with military precision, their hands resting casually on their weapons. "Marcus Kane," the leader called out as they reined in near the front porch. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Deputy Marshal Jack Crenshaw. We're looking for a fugitive who might have passed through your area." Marcus stepped onto the porch, keeping his hands visible but ready. "What kind of fugitive?" "Mexican woman, about 28 years old, wanted for murder in Denver. Goes by the name Elena Santos. She was sold at auction in Timber Falls yesterday, and we have reason to believe she might have ended up here." "A lot of people pass through this valley," Marcus replied carefully. "What makes you think she'd come here specifically?" Crenshaw's smile was cold and predatory. "Because you're the man who bought her, Mr. Kane, and we've come to collect our prize." The pretense dropped away like a discarded mask. These weren't lawmen. They were bounty hunters using false authority to legitimize their hunt. Marcus felt his hand drift toward the Colt on his hip. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said evenly. "Sure you do." Crenshaw dismounted slowly, his companions following suit. $2,000 is a lot of money for one woman, dead or alive. We're prepared to share that bounty with you if you cooperate. Otherwise, he let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. Otherwise what? Marcus asked, stepping down from the porch to meet them on level ground. Otherwise, we tear this place apart until we find her. And if you get in our way, well, accidents happen on the frontier. Marcus studied the three men, calculating odds and distances. He was outnumbered but had the advantage of knowing his own property. More importantly, he had something they didn't, a cause worth fighting for. Here's the thing, Marcus said, his voice taking on the dangerous edge that came from years of dealing with men who thought violence was the solution to every problem. This is my land. That woman is under my protection, and you're not lawmen. You're just killers with delusions of authority. Crenshaw's hand moved toward his gun. That's a dangerous accusation, Kane. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. Real deputy marshals don't travel in packs hunting women for bounty money. They don't threaten to tear apart a man's property without warrants or cause, and they sure as hell don't offer to split rewards with civilians. The tension ratcheted tighter, 3 against 1, hands hovering near weapons, waiting for someone to make the first move. That's when Elena appeared on the porch behind Marcus, no longer hiding, no longer covering her face. She held the rifle he'd told her to take, and her stance showed she knew how to use it. "You want me?" she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Here I am." Crenshaw's eyes lit up with greedy triumph. "Elena Santos, you're worth a lot of money, girl." "To who?" Elena asked, moving to stand beside Marcus. "Who's paying you to bring me back?" "Because I never had a trial, never had a chance to defend myself. Someone wants me dead badly enough to pay bounty hunters to track me across 2 territories." For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Crenshaw's face. Then his expression hardened again. "Dead or alive," the poster says. "Makes no difference to us." "It makes a difference to me," Marcus said quietly. And before anyone could react, he drew and fired. The shot took Crenshaw in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his own weapon flying. Elena's rifle cracked a heartbeat later, and one of the other bounty hunters yelped as his gun hand exploded in pain. The third man got his weapon clear and was bringing it up when Marcus's second shot took him center mass. He toppled backward, his unfired gun landing in the dust beside him. Crenshaw was on his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You're dead, Kane. Both of you. There'll be more coming. And next time they'll face the same reception," Marcus interrupted. "Elena, check their saddlebags. Let's see what kind of authority these deputy marshals really have." Elena found what they expected. No official documents, no legitimate warrants, just wanted posters with Elena's name and description, and a letter promising payment for her delivery to a private address in Denver. "Who hired you?" Marcus demanded, pressing the barrel of his Colt against Crenshaw's temple. "Go to hell," Crenshaw snarled. Elena knelt beside the wounded bounty hunter, her voice deadly calm. "I know who hired you. Garrett had partners, didn't he? Men who profited from his business, who stood to lose money if the truth about his death came out." Crenshaw's eyes flickered, confirming her guess. "They can't let me live," Elena continued, "because I'm the only one who knows what really happened that night. The only witness to his true character." Marcus bound the wounded men's hands while Elena gathered their weapons. The dead bounty hunter was searched and found to be carrying papers that confirmed Elena's suspicions. This wasn't about justice. It was about silencing a witness to protect powerful men's reputations and business interests. "What do we do with them?" Elena asked, looking at their captives. "We take them to the real law," Marcus said. "The territorial marshal in Colorado Springs, along with all this evidence of conspiracy and attempted murder." As they prepared for the journey that would either clear Elena's name or damn them both, Marcus looked at the woman who'd removed her mask of shame and stood proudly beside him, rifle in hand, ready to fight for the truth. "No more running," he said quietly. "No more running," Elena agreed. "Sure you do." Crenshaw dismounted slowly, his companions following suit. $2,000 is a lot of money for one woman, dead or alive. We're prepared to share that bounty with you if you cooperate. Otherwise, he let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. "Otherwise what?" Marcus asked, stepping down from the porch to meet them on level ground. Otherwise, we tear this place apart until we find her. And if you get in our way, well, accidents happen on the frontier." Marcus studied the three men, calculating odds and distances. He was outnumbered but had the advantage of knowing his own property. More importantly, he had something they didn't, a cause worth fighting for. "Here's the thing," Marcus said, his voice taking on the dangerous edge that came from years of dealing with men who thought violence was the solution to every problem. "This is my land. That woman is under my protection, and you're not lawmen. You're just killers with delusions of authority." Crenshaw's hand moved toward his gun. "That's a dangerous accusation, Kane." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Real deputy marshals don't travel in packs hunting women for bounty money. They don't threaten to tear apart a man's property without warrants or cause. And they sure as hell don't offer to split rewards with civilians." The tension ratcheted tighter, 3 against 1, hands hovering near weapons, waiting for someone to make the first move. That's when Elena appeared on the porch behind Marcus, no longer hiding, no longer covering her face. She held the rifle he'd told her to take, and her stance showed she knew how to use it. "You want me?" she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Here I am." Crenshaw's eyes lit up with greedy triumph. "Elena Santos, you're worth a lot of money, girl." "To who?" Elena asked, moving to stand beside Marcus. "Who's paying you to bring me back?" "Because I never had a trial, never had a chance to defend myself. Someone wants me dead badly enough to pay bounty hunters to track me across 2 territories." For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Crenshaw's face. Then his expression hardened again. "Dead or alive," the poster says. "Makes no difference to us." "It makes a difference to me," Marcus said quietly. And before anyone could react, he drew and fired. The shot took Crenshaw in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his own weapon flying. Elena's rifle cracked a heartbeat later, and one of the other bounty hunters yelped as his gun hand exploded in pain. The third man got his weapon clear and was bringing it up when Marcus's second shot took him center mass. He toppled backward, his unfired gun landing in the dust beside him. Crenshaw was on his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You're dead, Kane. Both of you. There'll be more coming. And next time, they'll face the same reception." Marcus interrupted. "Elena, check their saddlebags. Let's see what kind of authority these deputy marshals really have." Elena found what they expected. No official documents, no legitimate warrants, just wanted posters with Elena's name and description, and a letter promising payment for her delivery to a private address in Denver. "Who hired you?" Marcus demanded, pressing the barrel of his Colt against Crenshaw's temple. "Go to hell," Crenshaw snarled. Elena knelt beside the wounded bounty hunter, her voice deadly calm. "I know who hired you. Garrett had partners, didn't he? Men who profited from his business, who stood to lose money if the truth about his death came out." Crenshaw's eyes flickered, confirming her guess. "They can't let me live," Elena continued, "because I'm the only one who knows what really happened that night, the only witness to his true character." Marcus bound the wounded men's hands while Elena gathered their weapons. The dead bounty hunter was searched and found to be carrying papers that confirmed Elena's suspicions. This wasn't about justice. It was about silencing a witness to protect powerful men's reputations and business interests. "What do we do with them?" Elena asked, looking at their captives. "We take them to the real law," Marcus said, "the territorial marshal in Colorado Springs, along with all this evidence of conspiracy and attempted murder." As they prepared for the journey that would either clear Elena's name or damn them both, Marcus looked at the woman who'd removed her mask of shame and stood proudly beside him, rifle in hand, ready to fight for the truth. "No more running," he said quietly. "No more running," Elena agreed. The reckoning was coming, and they would face it together. The Territorial Marshal's office in Colorado Springs was a solid brick building that represented everything Elena had learned to fear about frontier justice. Official authority wielded by men who might or might not care about the truth. But as she and Marcus approached the front door, their wounded prisoners secured in the wagon behind them, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, hope backed by evidence. Marshal Thomas Hendricks was a weathered man in his 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen enough human nature to be skeptical of everyone, but too experienced to dismiss anything without investigation. He listened to their story with professional attention, examining the documents they'd taken from the bounty hunters and studying the wounded men who'd claimed to be his deputies. Jack Crenshaw, Hendricks said, looking at the shoulder-wounded bounty hunter with obvious distaste. I know this man. He's been trading on false authority for months, taking contracts from private parties who want people found and dealt with quietly. So you believe us? Elena asked, hardly daring to hope. I believe the evidence, Hendricks replied carefully. These men were operating without legitimate warrants, carrying forged documents, and attempting to collect on a private bounty rather than pursuing official justice. That's enough to hold them while we investigate the larger claims. But even as relief began to wash over Elena, Hendricks held up a warning hand. However, that doesn't resolve the original charges against you, Miss Santos. Murder is still murder, regardless of who's hunting you for it. Marcus stepped forward. What would it take to get those charges properly reviewed? To ensure Elena gets a fair hearing instead of frontier justice? Hendricks studied Elena's scarred face with professional assessment. It would take new evidence, witnesses who could testify to the circumstances of Garrett's death, or proof that the original investigation was compromised. We might be able to find that, Marcus said, but we'd need time, and we'd need Elena to remain free while we gather evidence. That's a problem, Hendricks admitted. The moment word gets out that she's been found, every bounty hunter and opportunist in 3 territories will be heading this way. And next time, they might not make the mistake of impersonating federal officers. Elena felt the familiar despair beginning to creep back in. Even with evidence of conspiracy, even with corrupt bounty hunters in custody, she was still a wanted woman with a price on her head. There might be another way, Hendricks said slowly, as if an idea was forming. If Miss Santos were to voluntarily surrender herself for proper trial, not to bounty hunters, but to legitimate territorial court, it would remove the incentive for private hunters. And if new evidence emerged during the trial, you're asking her to trust a system that's already failed her once, Marcus said sharply. I'm asking her to trust that not all of us are corrupt, Hendricks replied, and I'm suggesting that facing justice voluntarily, with legal representation and proper procedure, is better than spending the rest of her life running from men like Crenshaw. Elena looked between the 2 men, weighing her options. Trust the law that had condemned her without trial, or continue living as a fugitive. Always looking over her shoulder, always hiding. How long, she asked finally. How long would I have to gather evidence before surrendering? 2 weeks, Hendricks said. I can hold Crenshaw and his men that long on the charges we have. After that, word will get out, and you'll be hunted again. Elena nodded slowly. 2 weeks to find witnesses, to build a case, to prove what really happened that night. Elena, Marcus said quietly, you don't have to do this. We could disappear, head to California or Oregon, start over somewhere they'd never find us. Elena looked at him, this man who'd offered her everything, safety, protection, a new life, and realized that he was asking her to choose between freedom and justice. And for the first time since that terrible night in Denver, she knew which choice she had to make. No more running, she said firmly. If I spend the rest of my life hiding, then Garrett's partners win. They get to keep their reputations, their businesses, their lives built on the suffering of women like me. I won't give them that satisfaction. Hendricks nodded with something that might have been respect. Then we have 2 weeks to find the truth. As they left the marshal's office, Elena felt the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. She had chosen to trust in justice, to believe that truth could prevail over power and money. Now she had to hope that 2 weeks would be enough to prove her faith wasn't misplaced. But as they rode back toward Marcus's ranch to begin their investigation, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street. A lean man with cold eyes and patient hands who'd been tracking Elena Santos for longer than anyone realized. The real hunt was just beginning. The evidence came together piece by piece, like a puzzle that had been scattered by deliberate hands but could still be reconstructed by those patient enough to search for every fragment. Marcus and Elena spent their precious 2 weeks traveling between mining camps and frontier towns, following leads that led to other leads, slowly building a picture of what had really happened that night in Denver. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former chambermaid at Garrett's boarding house named Mary O'Sullivan, an Irish immigrant who'd been too frightened to speak up 2 years ago, but had been carrying the weight of her silence ever since. "I seen it all," Mary confessed in a small cabin outside Canyon Creek, her weathered hands shaking as she poured them coffee. "Was coming down to the kitchen for medicine for my sick boy when I heard the shouting. Saw that devil Garrett with his hands on Miss Elena. Saw her fighting him off." Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. After 2 years of being branded a murderess, here was someone who'd witnessed the truth. "I saw her hit him with that pan," Mary continued. "Saw him fall and crack his head. It was self-defense, plain as day. But when the law came asking questions, Mr. Garrett's business partners, they made it clear what would happen to anyone who spoke against a respectable businessman in favor of a Mexican girl." "They threatened you?" Marcus asked. Mary nodded. "Said I'd lose my job, my home, my boy would end up in an orphanage. Said who'd believe the word of an Irish drunk over upstanding citizens?" But Mary O'Sullivan wasn't the only witness they found. Dr. Andrew Morrison, who'd examined Garrett's body, still had his medical notes and was willing to testify that the head wound was consistent with an accidental fall rather than deliberate murder. 3 other boarders came forward with stories of Garrett's inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Most damning of all was James Whitfield, Garrett's former business partner, who'd had a crisis of conscience after years of living with the knowledge that an innocent woman was being hunted for their profit. "We were in the business of providing domestic services to mining camps," Whitfield admitted in a signed affidavit. "Garrett managed the Denver operation, recruiting girls who had nowhere else to go, keeping them in debt bondage. Elena Santos threatened that whole system when she fought back instead of submitting." The picture that emerged was of a systematic operation that profited from the desperation of vulnerable women. Elena's refusal to be victimized had threatened to expose the entire enterprise, making her a liability that needed to be eliminated. "They couldn't just kill me outright," Elena realized as they reviewed the evidence they'd gathered. "That would have raised questions. But if I died resisting arrest or was killed by bounty hunters while resisting capture, it would look like justice." On the morning they were scheduled to return to Colorado Springs, Marcus and Elena sat on his porch watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and promise. The evidence case was strong, stronger than either of them had dared hope, but the outcome was still uncertain. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked, studying Elena's profile as she gazed out over the mountains. "I'm ready for it to be over," Elena replied. "Ready to stop being Elena Santos, the fugitive, and become just Elena Santos, the woman." "Whatever happens at this trial," Marcus said quietly, "I want you to know something." Elena turned to look at him, seeing something serious and tender in his expression. "I want you to know that you've already won. You've taken back your name, your face, your right to stand in the sunlight without shame. No matter what a judge or jury decides, you've already reclaimed yourself." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone finally saw her as she truly was. Not as a victim or a villain, but as a woman of courage and strength. "Marcus," she said softly, "when this is over, when I'm truly free, I'd like to stay here with you, if you'll have me." His answer was a kiss, gentle and sure, that tasted like coming home. The trial in Colorado Springs lasted 3 days. Elena testified in her own defense for the first time, telling her story to a courtroom packed with spectators who'd come expecting to see a notorious murderess, but found instead a woman whose quiet dignity commanded respect. The prosecution's case crumbled under the weight of new evidence. Mary O'Sullivan's testimony was devastating in its simplicity. Dr. Morrison's medical evidence contradicted the prosecution's claims of premeditated murder, and James Whitfield's confession exposed the corruption that had driven the charges in the first place. When the jury returned after less than 2 hours of deliberation, their verdict was unanimous: not guilty on all charges. Elena Santos was finally, legally, officially free, but her vindication came with an unexpected bonus. The judge, outraged by the evidence of corruption and conspiracy, ordered a full investigation into Garrett's business partners and their network of human trafficking. The men who'd spent 2 years hunting Elena suddenly found themselves the hunted, facing charges that would put them away for decades. As Elena and Marcus left the courthouse together, she pulled the carefully folded burlap sack from her bag, the same one she'd worn at the auction, the symbol of her shame and hidden identity. "What will you do with it now?" Marcus asked. Elena looked at the rough fabric that had hidden her face for so long, then at the man who'd helped her find the courage to remove it. "I have an idea," she said with a smile that transformed her scarred face into something radiant. "But first, I think it's time for a wedding." 3 months later, on a perfect autumn morning when the Colorado mountains were dressed in gold and crimson, Elena Santos prepared to become Elena Kane in a ceremony that would transform the symbol of her greatest shame into something beautiful. The wedding took place in the valley where Marcus's ranch nestled against the foothills, beneath a canopy of cottonwood trees whose leaves whispered ancient blessings in the gentle breeze. The guest list was small but meaningful. Marshall Hendricks, who'd become a friend during the investigation, Mary O'Sullivan and her son, who'd traveled from Canyon Creek, Dr. Morrison and several other witnesses who'd helped expose the truth, and a handful of neighbors who'd come to respect the quiet strength of the woman their community had initially viewed with suspicion. Elena stood before a mirror in Marcus's bedroom, their bedroom now, putting the finishing touches on her appearance. Her dress was simple but elegant, made from cream-colored silk that she'd sewn herself during the long evenings of their courtship. Her hair was arranged in a style that didn't hide her scars, but incorporated them as part of her beauty, proof of battles fought and survived. But it was her veil that would make this ceremony truly extraordinary. Working with infinite care and unexpected artistry, Elena had transformed the rough burlap sack that had once hidden her identity into something that belonged in a fairy tale. She'd washed and bleached the fabric until it was soft and pale, then painstakingly embroidered it with threads of silver and white. Tiny wildflowers bloomed across the surface in delicate stitches, connected by flowing vines that turned the crude sackcloth into intricate lace. The transformation was complete when she added a border of real lace purchased with money earned from her work as a seamstress. Honest work, freely chosen, fairly compensated. The contrast between the rough foundation and the delicate embellishment was deliberate and powerful. This was what happened when something ugly was touched by love and patience in skilled hands. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked from the doorway, his voice soft with wonder. He'd seen the veil in progress but never completed, never worn. The effect was breathtaking, not just because of the craftsmanship, but because of what it represented. "More than ready," Elena replied, turning to face him. "I've been ready for this since the moment you recognized my voice." They walked together to the grove where their guests waited, Elena's hand resting confidently on Marcus's arm. When the small crowd saw her veil, a collective intake of breath rippled through the gathering. Even Marshall Hendricks, a man not given to sentiment, felt his eyes grow misty. The ceremony was officiated by a traveling preacher who understood that he was witnessing something more significant than a simple frontier wedding. This was a declaration of transformation, a public affirmation that shame could become beauty, that the worst things that happened to us didn't have to define us forever. "Do you, Marcus Kane, take Elena Santos to be your wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the grove. "I choose her as she is, for who she is, for all that she's survived and overcome. Do you, Elena Santos, take Marcus Kane to be your husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Elena's voice was steady and sure, no longer the whisper of a woman afraid to be heard. "I do. I choose him as my partner, my protector, my equal in all things." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus lifted Elena's veil carefully, as if he were unveiling a masterpiece. The afternoon sunlight caught the silver threads and made them sparkle like stars, but it was Elena's radiant smile that truly illuminated the moment. Their kiss was tender but passionate, the seal on a promise that had been 2 years in the making. As the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, Mary O'Sullivan wiped tears from her weathered cheeks and said to no one in particular, Would you look at that? She took something meant to hide her shame and turned it into a crown. Dr. Morrison, standing beside her, nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most beautiful things are born from the ugliest circumstances. Takes courage to transform pain into beauty like that. The reception was held in Marcus's ranch house, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by neighbors and friends. Elena moved through the gathering with quiet grace, accepting congratulations and well wishes. No longer the hunted fugitive or the mysterious woman with the covered face, but simply a bride surrounded by people who'd come to witness her happiness. Later that evening, as the last guest departed and the stars emerged in the clear mountain sky, Elena and Marcus stood together on their porch, still dressed in their wedding clothes but finally alone. "Do you know what the best part of today was?" Elena asked, leaning against Marcus's shoulder. "Tell me." "It wasn't the veil, though I'm proud of what I made from something so ugly. It wasn't the legal vindication, though that was wonderful. It was the moment I realized I wasn't hiding anymore. I was celebrating." Marcus tightened his arms around her. "You have nothing left to hide from." Elena smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a terrified girl fleeing Denver in the dark, to a woman who'd faced down bounty hunters and corrupt officials, to a bride who transformed the symbol of her shame into a testament to her strength. "I used to think that being seen was dangerous," she said quietly. "Now I know that being truly seen by the right person is the most precious gift in the world." As they stood together under the vast Colorado sky, Marcus and Elena Kane, former strangers connected by a voice in the darkness, former fugitive and protector, now husband and wife, knew that they'd found something that no amount of money could buy and no force could destroy. They'd found home in each other. And so, dear friends, we reach the end of Elena Santos's extraordinary journey. From a woman reduced to merchandise, her identity hidden beneath rough burlap, to Elena Kane, standing proudly in the sunlight, wearing a veil that transforms shame into beauty. Elena's story reminds us that our worst moments don't have to define us forever. Sometimes the very things that are meant to break us become the raw material for our greatest triumphs. That burlap sack, meant to hide her damaged face from the world, became the foundation for the most beautiful wedding veil anyone in that Colorado Valley had ever seen. But Elena's true transformation wasn't about changing her appearance. It was about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, her right to be seen and valued for who she truly was. Marcus Kane didn't save her by buying her at that auction. She saved herself by finding the courage to remove that sack and trust that someone would see her worth. Their love story lasted 43 years, until Marcus's death in 1914. Elena continued to live on their ranch until 1920, when she passed away peacefully at the age of 77. She never had children of her own, but she became a surrogate mother to countless women who found themselves in desperate circumstances, offering them shelter, work, and most importantly, the kind of recognition that helped them see their own worth. The burlap veil became a family heirloom, passed down through the children of couples Elena and Marcus helped over the years. Each bride who wore it understood its message, that beauty isn't about perfection, but about the courage to transform our pain into something meaningful. Elena's story resonates today because we all carry scars, some visible, some hidden, and we all face moments when the world tries to tell us we're damaged goods, past our expiration date, worth less because of what we've endured. Elena Santos Kane proved that's a lie. She proved that every person has the right to be seen, valued, and loved for exactly who they are. What about you? Have you ever felt like you had to hide parts of yourself to be acceptable? Have you experienced the transformative power of being truly seen and valued by someone who matters? Have you ever taken something meant to shame you and turned it into a source of strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about the times you've chosen courage over hiding, the moments when you've discovered that your scars tell a story of survival rather than defeat, the instances when someone saw your worth when you couldn't see it yourself. If this story of transformation and recognition moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to reclaim your voice and your dignity, show your support by hitting that like button. Your engagement tells us that these stories of resilience and love matter as much today as they did on the frontier. Subscribe to Wild West Stories and become part of our community of people who believe that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and loved for who they truly are. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest tales from the American frontier, where ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges and proved that the human spirit is stronger than any force that tries to break it. Remember, Elena Santos was sold for $2 with a sack over her head, but her true worth was immeasurable. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you, but by how you choose to see yourself. You have the power to transform your own story, to take whatever has been used to shame you and turn it into a crown. Until next time, remember that the frontier spirit lives on in everyone who refuses to be defined by their worst moments, who chooses love over fear, and who believes that every person deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to be truly seen. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wild heart of America, where love stories weren't always pretty, but they were always real, and where the most beautiful transformations often began with the courage to remove the masks we wear to hide our pain. We'll see you on the next trail, where more stories of courage, redemption, and the power of being truly known are waiting to be told.